Do I need a pitchfork? My name is Dustin Bajer. I am a gardener, hence I'm not a zombie. I'm here today to talk about gardening with zombies, also called, horticulture. So I practice something called permaculture. Hands up nice and high if you've heard of the term permaculture before. So a few people. For the rest of you in the room, permaculture is really, it's a design science trying to mimic the patterns and principles found in nature. And it's really about how you would connect the elements in a garden together as opposed to the individual components. And throughout the course of the talk, I want to kind of convince you that while the zombie apocalypse is obviously terrifying and brings its own challenges, there might also be some opportunities. This here is the soil food web. And for all of the people in the room who are not currently zombified, this is what is keeping you human. So as was just mentioned, in healthy soil, there's a variety of living and non-living things. There are, in just a few tablespoons of soil, billions of living things. There's probably species in there that have never really been studied. There are so many organisms in that soil. It would take multiple lifetimes or billions of lifetimes to really understand the dynamics that's going on in there. And we believe that it is this healthy soil that gardeners have been exposed to that is keeping us from being zombies. I want to talk to you about a permaculture technique called needs and yields. The idea in a system, even this system here, is that each living or non-living thing requires certain things in order to exist and also offers certain yields up. This here, a non-zombie, would need a few things like healthy soil in this post-apocalyptic world, food, obviously, water, fiber for clothing or for shelter, for building, and of course, everybody needs love. A human being might yield more people, if you find the right other human, food, potentially, for zombies, habitat, so it could build, culture, art, and of course, humans are capable of giving love. I want to turn things over to this fellow here. His needs and yields analysis is a little less complicated, certainly on the needs side of things, right? Brains. That is the primary goal of all zombies. They need to feed. They have a very odd and very specific appetite. But what are some of the yields of a zombie? So more zombies. Life creates life. Random walking around of the wasteland, sort of a random motion. We've got biting and scratching. It's a very zombie-like activity. Basically, the perfect scarecrow. That's a good yield. And nutrients. So yes, they're dead. Yes, they were human, but they are also made up of what they gathered throughout life and potentially, I guess, some added brain matter. So a permaculture design, if we were to survive this zombie apocalypse, I'm going to make the case that we can take the needs and yields of a human and the needs and yields of a zombie, and we might actually be able to partner them together in, I want to say, mutually beneficial ways. The idea behind this is that in any garden or in any design, if you are out there doing physical work, you're fulfilling the need of some element of your garden, right? If you're turning compost, or you're adding fertilizer, or you're mulching things, you are working very hard to provide some needs for your garden. So needs that aren't currently being met, we call work in permaculture design. If you are pulling off something or bagging up something, if you're removing something from your garden, if you have a waste product from your garden, another way of looking at that is you actually have a yield that doesn't currently have a use, right? And so the goal in a permaculture design is to kind of place things in such a way that all of the needs all of the yields fulfill the needs and vice versa. And in a perfect permaculture-y type world, you've designed out work and you've designed out waste. Right? The end product is the start of some other process. And we often see this in forests, right? If you have a buildup of organic matter on the ground, well, you have all these microorganisms and small animals and small insects that can break that down and build that beautiful soil, and that becomes, another yield that is taken up by other organisms or other elements in that system. So the yields and needs analysis of a human and a zombie, kind of looking at it from this angle, is pretty simple. So humans yield more people, and we yield food. All of those things could fulfill the needs of the zombies, right? That kind of works for the zombies, doesn't work super well for the gardeners. So this, by and large, is a situation we want to avoid. But what if we took a look at it from the other way around? If these are the yields of our zombie, and these are the needs of the gardeners, can we match those up somehow? In what ways can we sort of connect these two different elements together in order to basically enable us to survive this post-apocalyptic world? Here's one, basically the perfect scarecrow, right? Scaring off the birds, not so much the magpies, I guess. And here's a little Three Sisters garden, and it's keeping out the crows, and so the benefit of our zombie scaring away some of the birds is going to increase our yield, and we'll be more likely to survive. So we've tied together the yield of a zombie with a need of a human. The other thing that I'll kind of point out, it's a little bit of a tangent, is hands up if you're familiar with the Three Sisters garden. So the Three Sister garden is a traditional indigenous companion planting where you have corns, beans, and squash. And really, it's the perfect example of the needs and yields working together. So you have corn, which are heavy feeders, which yield food, but also provide structure, have a support. You've got beans, which are a nitrogen fixer, so can feed the soil, and also need something to grow up, right? Need a support, like the corn. And then you have squash, which can protect the soil, prevent erosion, hold moisture down. And the three of them together, because of that needs and yields analysis, because they all come together in mutually beneficial ways, actually can be more productive than if they're planted individually. So there's our kind of simple needs and yields analysis for a zombie and a human. But let's see what else we can do with maybe one of the other yields of a zombie. So we have the random wandering of the wasteland. Upon reflection, it's not entirely random, is it? Right? These zombies have a bit of a goal, so they tend to travel in the direction of brains, and we can use that to our advantage. It doesn't have to be purely running away from them, but if we keep our distance and we say, place something in between the zombie and us, we can get them to do a little bit of work. Here's some zombie compost turning, right? Combined with that biting and scratching yield, we have this turning of the compost. And provided that we're, just keeping our distance, and on the opposite side of the zombie, we can put them to effective use. With a little bit of, some simple tools, you can imagine all kinds of interesting creative things you could do with the random wandering of a zombie. Here I've got a little bow and arrow, some seeds, a little cloth, and a string. You could take those seeds, put them in the cloth, just poke a tiny hole in that cloth, attach it, like wrap it up, attach it to that arrow, and you have yourself basically a zombie seeder, right? So that zombie can wander the wasteland, sow your garden. What's great about zombies, don't hit the brain, because you'll kill your seeder, but otherwise, they're going to pretty much work forever, which is great. This is a little bit more gruesome here, but willow grows well here. I don't know if anybody's done any live willow fences or seen live willow fences before. I like the idea of taking some willow spikes, sticking them in the ground, making them real sharp and pointy, and of course, knowing the zombies, brain on the other side, you're going to have them fall in, which is going to, I would argue, build some soil, remove some zombies from the environment. These are living willows, so they're going to grow up. As they grow up, you can weave them together. You can coppice them for fiber, for wood. We could do, of course, a needs and yields analysis of our kind of living willow fence here, but we can get some shelter, fiber and fuel, medicine, healthy soil building in the process, which is going to bring us a little bit of added immunity. You can let that grow up, and we have a living barrier, right? We can start growing our own sort of walled fortresses to keep zombies out. This here is a zombie wall on contour, and so it's a slight slope. Maybe this is exaggerated a little bit, but we have some water just kind of settling in that little dip there. It's going to create a lens of water in the soil, and if you plant your garden downhill from that, you end up with a little bit of free water in the process. The other thing about zombie motion, though, is if there's not a brain, it seems to me that they pinball around the room, don't they? Right? They'll walk to one wall, maybe follow along the wall a little bit, turn around, cross the room, run into the other wall. Really just sort of mindless. I was thinking about this the other day, and one of the things that I do besides garden is I keep bees. And there's a piece of beekeeping equipment, and it has this little shape here. And the way that it works is you can put it, when it's time to extract honey, you can place it above the brood where the queen's laying her eggs, and below the honey, and any bees in those honey boxes within 24 hours will have made their way out of the honey boxes, and they have an easy time escaping, but they have a very hard time getting back in. Being that bees are certainly smarter than zombies, I figured you could use even just the geometry of your shelters as a way of deterring the zombies here. You can see here that in red, if somebody comes in one of these corners, there's a pretty good chance that they're just going to get redirected back outside. And so I kind of designed a little bit of a walled fortress here based on that idea. The doors are entirely open. Anybody can come and go, but by and large, the zombies just end up walking through and out the other side. I also integrated a few of these. I've got some, of course, the whole thing is zombie living willow wall. We've got some of the zombies, not all, some of them will make it past the second group, and so we've got some zombie compost turning here. And then, of course, I thought, well, we could have a few, maybe some turrets or some little pillars here where you could shoot some zombies full of seeds and have them walk around and sow plants for you. In an urban environment, it might look something more like this, using the city grid. Same kind of idea, putting the doors on the corners where the zombies have not a high likelihood of coming in just because of the geometry. So we took a random wandering of the wasteland, a little bit of biting and scratching, and we basically completed some needs here. We've got healthy soil microbes, we've got some food, we've got some water, we've got some fiber, and we've got some shelter. There might be a little bit of disagreement in the room, but I am under the impression that you can take a zombie and you can break that down into some healthy soil. Prove me wrong. And I think it's all about getting the right layering, right? So we want our nice layers of zombie and browns. I think if you get that kind of structure right, make sure that the moisture is there. You need a little bit of water, right? That people talk about the wrung out sponge. Just a little bit of moisture in there. And then, of course, oxygen, where, if you, once again, bring in your zombie friends here, should be no problem getting that oxygen worked into that zombie compost. Could I have a better name for zombie compost that's not zompost? This, by the way, you'll often see in permaculture designs. This here's sometimes called an herb spiral. It doesn't have to be a spiral, the one on the bottom that I'm kind of talking about. But the idea, and I think this would be true in a zombie apocalypse, is that we're going to be forced to garden in small spaces. And so increasing our yield as much as possible is going to be important. And so I just kind of wanted to contrast these sort of two gardens here. The one on the top is like a pretty standard garden. We have a tendency to flatten out our garden beds, sow everything in there. But if you think about it, let's imagine our sun is to the top left. The growing conditions along that flat stretch of earth don't vary too much. You might have some slight differences in one side of your garden and in the quality of soil and in the other, but you can do some really interesting things by even playing around with topography in your landscaping. And so this is basically that same garden bunched up into a mound, sometimes in a spiral, But the idea here is that the side that is facing the sun is going to be is obviously going to be more have more sun exposure than the side that is a little bit more in the shade, and then you get all of this variation in between. And then the top is going to tend to be a little bit drier than the bottom, and you're going to have all of this variation in between. And so the benefit here is that if you really take a look at, let's say, the needs and yields of these individual plants, you can partner them with the appropriate place in the topography. And so by playing around with just the physical shape of your garden, you can often increase the amount of plants, but also increase the variety of plants. So here we've got some nutrients. We're breaking them down, hopefully turning that into healthy soil. We're hopefully going to be taking that healthy soil and growing some food, maybe incorporating that in with our living willow wall and growing some fiber and some shelter. And if we start sticking it all together, it looks like a mess. But the point that I'm trying to make is that if you approach this kind of from a systems permaculture viewpoint, you can start linking the yields of something like a zombie with the needs of a gardener, and you can actually do that in such a way that the zombies, in the right circumstances, might even be beneficial. So we're trying to design out that work, and we're trying to design out that waste by connecting those needs and those yields, which is really what this is. This is healthy soil. This is an ecosystem under your feet. Things are living, things are dying. The end of every single process becomes the beginning of another process. There are billions of little interactions happening. And the end of every single, the yield of every single element in here is becoming a need of every other element. That is what an ecosystem is. And that's also what a community is. I do think that in the end, if we're going to survive a zombie apocalypse, it's the community that is going to enable that. Every single person in this room has their own interests, has their own skills, has their own individual needs and their own individual yields. And so something like the Edmonton Horticulture Society could function to bring those needs and yields together to behave like that ecosystem. And I think create a more resilient post-apocalyptic world. Thank you.